Let's look at the next question to solve. This includes having to use string handling capabilities. So let's input, the question says input a password. So we'll have some password that will be input and determine if the password is strong or weak based on certain rules. And we are told, well, the first rule is it's strong if it has a minimum of 6 characters, okay? It must have one uppercase letter, all right? We'll search for an uppercase letter. And it must contain one of these special characters. So it must contain either an exclamation, dollar, or a star. And if each of these criteria is met, then we can conclude that we have a strong password. If one of the criteria is not met, then the password is considered weak. So let's see how we can solve this problem. The first thing to do is let's get our password. So our password, again, I'm going to get this from an edit box, edt pass.text. And because it's a string, a password will be a string. There's no conversion that's needed. So I don't need to do any conversion. And this variable will be declared of type string. So the technique that's going to be used in solving this problem is making use of Boolean variables. And just to quickly recap, a Boolean variable is one that contains the value true or false. True and false is understood by Delphi. Sometimes students make the mistake of saying true with quotes around it or false with quotes around it. And this is incorrect because the minute you put quotes around it, you are making it into a string. And we don't want it to be treated as strings. We want it to use it as Boolean variables. So we use true and we use false, which is understood by the computer. Think of it as being similar to a switch. So a switch is either on or off, in this case, true or false. And this can help us very nicely in solving many different problems that we're faced with. So I'll show you how we can use this technique. So let's look at the first case where we need the password to have a minimum of 6 characters. So I'm going to have a couple of Boolean variables. So my first Boolean variable, I'm going to call it check1, and that is of type Boolean. And I'm going to set check1. I'm going to set it to false. In other words, the light is off. And then I'm going to check if the password has a minimum of 6 characters. In other words, 6 or more, greater than, equal to 6 or more. And if it does have more than 6 or more characters, I will change the switch to true. And if the switch is then true, that's an indicator. If check1 is true, that's an indicator it has a minimum of 6 characters. So I'm going to then use a check to see if the length of password is greater than or equal to 6, then I'm going to set check 1 to true. End. So if you look at this, you will see that the assumption that is made is that The password did not have 6 or more characters, therefore check 1 was set to false. But if the length of the password is greater than equal to 6, we then turn the switch on and check 1 then becomes true. It's a nice technique that can be used. You make an assumption, and then if a certain condition holds true, that assumption changes. We're going to do exactly the same thing with the second criteria. It must have 1 uppercase letter. So how do we check for 1 uppercase letter? Again, let me create another Boolean. So I'm going to have check 2, and I'm going to work on the same assumption. Let's set check 2 to false. That means it does not have the first character as being uppercase. And if it is, I'll change it then to true. So if, how do I check the first letter? Well, I will then say password, square bracket 1, treat it like an array. 1 means check the first character. And how do I check if it is uppercase? Well, I can make use of sets. Delphi has an operator in. I can then check if some value is in, and I can define my set using square brackets. And if I want capital letters, I will then say A dot dot is a range. Where do I want my range to stop? At Z. So if password 1 is in the set A to Z, that means the first character is in uppercase. Begin, and then change check 2 to true. End. I hope you're appreciating how this technique of the Boolean variable works. Just a note, if you were checking lowercase, you could then use small letters. Delphi will then distinguish between the range of capital letters, small letters. Similarly, if you are checking vowels, you would then have separate them with commas, E, I, etc. If you are looking at any other special characters, you could then put the special character in, for example, $, and separate each special character with a comma, because it's not a range that we're looking at. Let's look at the third part, which is a little more challenging. It's not a straightforward check as the previous two. We want the password to contain at least 1 of the following special characters. This is a little more tricky because the password has multiple characters, and we don't know at which position these characters that we're looking for could possibly be at. If we look at the previous two, we were looking at a specific condition. In other words, the length greater than or equal to 6, or the first character was uppercase. It was just a single check. Here, I need to check each value of my password. So if my password has multiple characters, as it would, I need to go to each position and check, does that contain an exclamation, dollar, or star? Does that contain an exclamation, dollar, or star? And I check each one. And when I do find it, let's say I do find it, then the change needs to take place in terms of the Boolean variable in exactly the same way as I explained previously. So let's attempt this technique. So now I need a check 3, which is going to serve that purpose. And because I need to check each character, a loop is going to come in here, and it's going to be a fixed repetition. So I'm going to run a loop for I, assign the value 1 to the length of password, do, and let's begin. And let's check each character. Well, you would have realized I forgot to initialize my check. So let's set check 3 to false. And let's check each character if password. When I refer to password, I'm referring to the entire string, but when I use square brackets, I'm referring to one character. In the previous example, I was referring to position 1, a specific position. Here I'm referring to position I. So the nice thing about this is as I changes in the loop, I'm going to be looking at different positions, different characters in my string. So if password I, I'm going to use the same concept of a set is in the set. And here I'm going to define my set. I want an exclamation mark. I want $1. And I want a star. And if the password I is in that set, then what does it mean? It means that the password contains at least one character. So I can then change my check 3. My check 3 can now change to false. End the if, end the for. So keep in mind that this for loop is going to run multiple times. So when I is 1, I'm checking password 1. In other words, I'm checking the first position. If this position has one of these values, if it has a value, check will change to, and as you can see, I had made a mistake. It should be true. And if it is contained in that, then check becomes true. If not, I then becomes 2. I check if the second character, I check if the position in the second character, that position contains one of those, then check could become true. And as the loop continues, it's checking each character. It just needs to find one to be in the set for check to be true. If it goes through the entire loop and nothing was found to be in the set, check would have remained false. So that would have been an indicator that it did not find any special characters. So to round off this problem, we now need to make a final check to see if check 1 equals true and check 2 equals true and check 3 equals true. Then you can display a message to say the password is strong, else the password is weak. I hope this helps.